But what about the other characters? They play a big role in the telling of this story, so let's take a look. We'll start with Miss Honey, Matilda's teacher. Both book and movie portray her as a kind and loving person who adores her students and gets great joy out of teaching, so much so that she can't bear the thought of leaving her job, even if it means leaving her overbearing Aunt Trunchbull for good. The movie Miss Honey had a little bit more of an edge to her. She was a little braver and actually stood up to Miss Trunchbull a couple of times. Now, the book Miss Honey does admit that she's not a brave person and that she has difficulty standing up to people, but in a way, that kind of draws a nice contrast between her and Matilda. They both had similar situations growing up, and yet they both emerge with these very different personalities. On top of that, the Miss Honey in the book is a lot more blunt with her students about Miss Trunchbull. She doesn't sugarcoat anything. She tells them straight up just how horrible she is. Though it could be that the movie Miss Honey would have done that as well had they started at the beginning of the school year like they did in the book. For me, though, the deciding point is the kids. Now, in the book, Crunchum Hall is described as a war zone, with this long-standing and ongoing war between the students and Trunchbull. The movie portrays them more like an oppressed and downtrodden population under the thumb of a cruel dictator, with little to no rebellion. They have a lot more fear of her in the movie, as evidenced by the continuous and, after a while, silly scared takes. It isn't until after Matilda arrives that rebellion starts to take place, which you can see in the way Trunchbull reacts to the riot and the cake-eating scene. She doesn't know what to do and loses control of her students, and you can see the panic in her eyes. Whereas in the book, she quells them with a glance, as if she's used to this sort of thing. Also in the book, what starts the riot is not Matilda as it is in the movie. In fact, Matilda doesn't do much of anything during this scene except watch and comment occasionally. What gets the kids going is that despite the fact that Bruce Bogtrotter has eaten 3/4 of this enormous cake, he is still going strong and is determined to finish the entire thing. In the movie, Bruce is ready to give in, and it isn't until Matilda starts cheering him on that he finds the strength to keep going. This is true of the other characters as well. Hortensia in the book is described as a heroic and battle-scarred soldier who brags about the many pranks she's pulled on Trunchbull in her day. Movie Hortensia, while still having a toughened edge about her, just talks about how horrible Trunchbull is. Lavender, Matilda's friend, pranks the Trunchbull by putting a newt in her drinking water. In the book, however, this is carefully planned. She volunteers to get the water, waits for most of the afternoon to catch the newt, and keeps it until the next day. Her inspiration to do so comes from the pranks that Hortensia told her about. In the movie, the catching of the newt is incidental, and the idea to put the newt in the water literally occurs to her at the last minute. And the inspiration seems to be that Matilda has been put in the chokey. The main difference here is that in the book, Matilda merely strikes the final blow in a long-fought battle, whereas in the movie, she actually incites the rebellion that eventually topples the Trunchbull. Now, there's nothing wrong with either of these portrayals. They're both consistent with the message of the story, but for reasons that I'll explain later, I prefer the book's version. For reasons you'll explain later? What kind of an out is that? Well, I'll talk about that more when we talk about story. For now, I'll just say that in the book, Matilda has a certain amount of kinship with her fellow students because of all the pranks that she herself had pulled on her parents. In the movie, however, she's more set apart from them. She emerges as more of a rebellious influence, which again, isn't bad, but I like the book's portrayal better. Yet you won't tell us why. You'll find out. Just be patient. Fine. Whatever. There are a few more characters too, but they don't really overlap. Overall, it's the kids in Crunchum Hall who make up the bulk of the supporting cast, and they seem to be more strongly portrayed in the book. Though for what reason, I'm not sure. Now comes one of the more ambiguous categories. Imagery. How did each medium use its own unique method of storytelling to its fullest advantage to best create this fictional world? Roald Dahl is one of those authors whose writing is so vivid and descriptive that it translates really easily to film. His way of describing that which seems most insignificant or ridiculous, and yet is very appropriately descriptive about a character, is a method that is emulated by many children's authors today. So how do you take that style and translate it into movie form? Casting, again, is a big part of it. Danny DeVito and Rhea Perlman practically look like caricatures themselves, and Pam Ferris pulled off Trunchbull perfectly. The makeup work for Trunchbull is marvelous as well, making her look both comical and intimidating. And also a little disgusting, something that wasn't really played up in the book. Locations are also done really well. The Wormwood's house is lit in such a way that while it seems like a nice enough house, you can still tell that a fully dysfunctional family lives there. Cruncham Hall, which doesn't get much of a description in the book at all, looks like the kind of oppressive environment you would expect with the Trunchbull as your headmistress, and yet still looks very much like a school. It should be noted that the book does dabble in a visual medium as well. Like many of Roald Dahl's books, Matilda contains illustrations by a longtime collaborator of Dahl's, Quentin Blake. The drawings are always very whimsical and childlike, but to be honest, the story doesn't really need them. Interestingly enough, the movie also dabbles in the book's territory by having Danny DeVito narrate certain parts. As children, many of us might have had books read to us by our parents before we went to sleep at night, including stories by Roald Dahl. As such, Dahl wrote his stories in such a way that they're almost meant to be read aloud. And so it's possible that our first encounter with a Roald Dahl story was not a reading experience, but a listening experience. Which makes the fact that we have parts of the movie read to us, mostly just transitions and background material, that much more poignant. But what really makes the movie is the way it's shot. You have to admire the use of forced perception in this movie. Matilda in the book is described as a small girl, but in the movie we really get a feel for how small she is. Everything and everybody looks larger than life, which again, with an actor like Danny DeVito, is no easy task. Extreme close-ups of the Wormwoods and Trunchbull show us every detail of their faces, making them look much more like caricatures, but also more intimidating. Plus, I love the way we're introduced to Trunchbull. In the book, when Trunchbull first appears on the scene, we don't get a full description because the narrator of the story isn't quite ready to give it. I mean, this woman is so scary, the freaking narrator is afraid of her. The movie portrays this by not showing us her face for the first few minutes she's on screen. We see her silhouette, her back, her feet, everything but her face, up until her first direct encounter with Matilda. This not only makes her seem larger than life, but it perfectly captures that intimidation that even the narrator of the book felt. And we can't ignore the magic. Again, the book Matilda doesn't use her powers nearly as much as the movie Matilda, but when she does, they're pretty straightforward. She wants the glass to tip over, and it does. She wants the chalk to float, and it does. The movie reflected this by having the special effects be as simple and straightforward as possible. There's nothing flashy about them. The few scenes that might be there for the purpose of showing off the special effects don't last very long, and they don't distract from the story. That's the sign of good special effects, in my opinion. They get the job done, but not so obviously that you can tell that there are special effects happening. And in this instance, it captures the simplicity of Matilda's powers. So overall, the imagery of the movie took the already brilliant imagery of the book, built on it, and made it even better, which is exactly what a movie based on a book should do.